and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones, and we are so glad to have you here. Today, we are talking about the state of journalism in New Jersey. We sit between two major media markets, New York and Philadelphia, and finding consistent coverage is often challenging. Add to that the increase in many layoffs that so many publications, radio, and TV stations are making. Where does that leave us as consumers of news? Well, we're going to talk about that with our guest today. Patrick Lavery is a radio reporter who was recently laid off. He's standing by. First up, we're going to get to the layoffs at the Ledger, so let's get to it. Jonathan Salant is a political reporter, and up until a few weeks ago, he was the only reporter covering New Jersey's congressional delegation in Washington, D.C. Last month, New Jersey Advanced Media made a decision to make some cuts, and Jonathan was laid off along with some local news photographers. He joins me now to give us some insight on the state of political journalism. Jonathan, it's good to see you. I'm so sorry to hear this news. Along with New Jersey's entire congressional delegation, 13 out of the 12 are stepping up and saying, we don't like this. Can you tell me about it?
Yeah, that still is it's very heady, and I'm still getting my arms all around it. It's 13 of the 14 lawmakers, and the 14th actually talked to me privately and expressed and was very generous in his comments to me. This is happening around the country where newspapers and news organizations are cutting back. And the first thing to go is their Washington reporter. You don't see the Washington reporter in the newsroom. It's far away. If you have one position, you'd rather have a City Hall reporter. You don't see, you figure you can get the news of the day from the Associated Press or one of the big newspapers that have that syndicate their columns. The thing you can't get is what the local people are doing. And when folks leave the state, Jersey's one of them, and they go to Washington, there's nobody there keeping an eye on them. And that's the loss.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, certainly it's about those relationships. You know, you're saying that people want to hear from their local, what's happening at City Hall, but we also send, our taxpayer dollars for the members of Congress. And there certainly is an interest because when you turn on nighttime TV, politics is always leading. So, where's the disconnect here?
Well, the thing is, you get the press releases, you can make a phone call, and you can write some of the stuff they're doing. Just the difference is holding them accountable. Difference is talking to their colleagues and asking them what they're doing. Difference is watching the debate on the House or Senate floor. It's just as something happens, immediately reaching them and asking them a question, reading the bills, reading their speeches, talking to the lobbyists who interact with them. That you can do best in Washington. You can see people face to face.
See, you bring up a great point. For, decades, I was a political reporter in Trenton, and there's always the big headline, the governor's budget address, there's, car insurance reforms. Whatever the issue is, there's always a story behind the story, and unless you were there to physically see people and interact with them, to see who they're talking to, the public is missing out on the context, I think. So can you talk a little bit about why that's so important?
Well, when some of the lawmakers go down to Washington and either drive or they take the train, a lot of them take the train actually, and then the only way you know what they're doing, especially if you're up in Jersey, is what they tell you. If we have a reporter there, it's what I'm watching them. I always considered myself the eyes and ears of the public when their officials are in Washington and telling them what they're doing. And that I think is the most important. That's what's lost, that there's nobody watching them because they're far away. I have a desk at the Capitol, the reason I have a desk and other reporters have a desk is so we can inform the public what their officials are doing. That's how important it is. The First Amendment, I believe, gives us a moral responsibility to set the whole public officials accountable to the public.
Yeah. So if you only have Associated Press or Reuters or one of the big national reporters kind of doing a pool coverage, can you talk about the nuances that get lost and how it impacts on the people watching and the people reading?
Well, when President Trump was impeached the first time, the story around the country was President Trump is impeached. The story from my readers was Jeff Van Drew is one of only two Democrats in the country the vote against impeaching President Trump. When President Biden signed his infrastructure bill, the story around the country was President Biden signed his infrastructure bill, bipartisanship, 1.1 trillion, I think the number was. The story from my readers was New Jersey's getting $13 billion from this bill, and this is what it's for. Uh, I covering the White House and being down here, when the Biden first unveiled the infrastructure bill, it included money for the Gateway Tunnel, which everybody who's watching this probably knows all about the Gateway Tunnel.
Right.
Well, the members of the delegation learned about it from my story because the White House gave me the story early because I have a relationship with them because I'm in Washington.
Yeah, and it takes time to cultivate those relationships. And if you have, can you talk a little bit about the impact that the reality of the impact? What things are going to be missed? Especially when it comes to we're not in an election year. Well, we're in an election year in New Jersey, but not a congressional election year. But what gets lost on the voters and people, the constituents?
Well, the big thing is being lost again. All you would know, for the most part, of what's going on is what they tell you, what the lawmakers tell you in press releases. I mean, even the lawmakers, they want coverage. They want people to talk, to tell them, to say what they're doing, but they want an independent person to say what they're doing. And also lost something that former Congressman Malinowski told me. If I'm not here, then most of your knowledge is going to come from the paid advertising. Millions of dollars of advertising is being paid. And I, at least as a reporter, I can hold them accountable. I can be the fact checker. I can say, this is not true, or this is true, or this only tells part of the story. There's no independent voice questioning what the lawmakers are telling you anymore.
And I think what might surprise some people watching who may not, be intently, into politics is the fact that, and you mentioned it, those in elected office, they actually want to talk. They want to be they even want to be challenged sometimes so they can show, here's how I stand on an issue. They want that platform to be able to talk more about their issues.
Well, most of the people who run for Congress, they're very honorable men and women. They believe in what they're doing. They had a reason for running for Congress, and they want the public to know why they ran, what they're doing for the constituents. And that's something I can talk about. And also, if you write a critical story of these folks, as long as you're fair and accurate, they don't have to like it, but they accept it. And that's the other thing. You want to have, if you're going to hold somebody accountable, you better get your facts straight. And I like to think that I have a reputation of doing that.
Exactly, because when you have that relationship, when it hits the fan and there is a difficult story, they will come to you because they know that you're going to do a fair job. Again, my personal experience, when the heat is on, sometimes a politician, they know they've got to talk. Well, they're going to pick the person that they have the best relationship with. Otherwise, you get a press release and then people are just regurgitating it. And that, personally drives me crazy because I'm like, well, that's, either reporters who don't have time or it's being lazy, just regurgitating press releases as opposed to, hey, you know what? I talked to such and such and here's what they said. Here's what they mean.
And also, nowadays there are too many people in Washington with a smartphone who their idea of journalism is to stick the smartphone in somebody's face and get them to say something stupid so they can tweet them out and get 1 million clicks. And isn't this great? Look what I got. And a lot of lawmakers are now more gun shy because we're all human beings and you sometimes stumble and you make a mistake and you need to take it back. You just stumble on words. You use the wrong word. It happens all the time. And some of these folks, but I'm not asking those questions. I'm not asking them to react to the latest report that Joe Biden is too old or that President Trump, Donald Trump sent out this tweet of something. We never asked those questions. I'm asking them substantive questions. What does this mean to Jersey? Why are you supporting this issue when it might do this? During the tax package in 2017, our angle was the state and local tax deduction. It was not, do you have the votes in Congress? What about this person? What about this person? No, this is what that tax package means for New Jersey. And we would ask our lawmakers, why are you voting for it? In fact, it turned out that of the 12 House members, of the 14 in delegation, 13 of the 14 voted no. Why are you voting against this? Or why are you voting for it when it looks like it could hurt your constituents?
Yeah. It ultimately, you have to wonder, what is this doing to the future of political journalism? Is this going to backfire on media companies who are letting go of their reporters? Because, you touched on it, truth in advertising. It's hard to tell what is a news story that's been legitimately vetted, what's something that has been taken out of context and manipulated because, a cell phone, and that's really, all you need to do to churn out material, but you don't understand necessarily the source or what the intent behind it. So what does the future look like for journalism?
Well, I always go back to this New Yorker cartoon with a four-legged animal standing in front of a computer typing, and the caption is, "On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog." You don't know where the source of this information is. It's a million things. On the internet, the New York Times is just as credible as some guy in his basement. And you don't know a lot where that's coming from. Pearls Against Swine, that comic that runs Sunday, I know Sunday in the papers, and they talk about, the people on Twitter keep me informed. And the guy says, people on Twitter are fast. And then somebody says, wait a second, what about the trained journalists who are losing their jobs? And the other person says, oh, the people on Twitter are fast. And that's because you have non-trained journalists or people. So citizen journalism. Somebody once wrote and said, well, we don't need to pay for journalism. Well, you do need to pay for journalism. And it's not that the news organizations are hurting, or of course, it's the public that's paying the price for it. That our democracy depends on a informed electorate. The big question is, there was no George Santos's under my watch. He's the lawmaker who basically lied or his way into a congressional seat, and there was no reporter there vetting, or a little weekly, but none of the big reporters, the big news organizations vetting his background. They would have found that there was nothing there.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That is such a good point because, if you have that reporter who is in your face and putting your tape recorder or microphone up, and that person is going to be back, and that person, is going to be holding you accountable, that wouldn't have happened.
Well, you need the reporter to be looking up all those records. I mean, some of it is frankly very tedious, and one of the names I've made in Washington. In fact, I spoke for a class last night. A friend of mine teaches a class in a university in China, and he had me go on 12:30 in the morning because there it's daytime. They're daytime Monday, and I'm doing it from Washington at 12:30 in the morning, and we're talking about people lobbying for a Chinese company, and it's a long list. And somebody said, well, how do we know who these people are? I recognize some of the names. I've been in Washington for 35 years. I said, no, you have to look up each one individually. It takes a lot of time, hours on end. It can be really tedious, maybe days on end. But that's how you get the stories.
Well, and that's it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so what's next for you? Just final thoughts. Are you? I mean, you've spent so much time in Washington, D.C. Are you still going to continue even though you have been laid off?
I'm hoping to get another job. I was elected to the Standing Committee of Correspondence, which is the group of reporters who govern the press gallery in Washington, and they credential reporters. The government doesn't tell you who's a journalist. Journalists decide who's a journalist. And I got more votes in the race than anybody else running, and included people from the Associated Press and USA Today, which are much more well-known in Washington than New Jersey Advanced Media. But it was because I've been here so long, they really wanted somebody with institutional memory, and I'd like to think a tribute to the work I've done as a journalist these last 3 or 4 decades.
Yeah.
And I want to stay on the standing committee. You have to stay on the standing committee. You have to be a daily news reporter for an outlet, either newspaper or online. So my goal is to get a job so I can stay as a daily news reporter and keep my seat on the standing committee.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we would love to have you back. Because that institutional knowledge, that context and perspective is critical to storytelling, and it's critical to keeping our elected officials, in check. And I appreciate everything that you do, and I'm sorry that this happened to you, but I'm so glad that you were able to come on the show and share a little bit with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. Anytime.
All right. If you you listen to the radio during your commute in New Jersey, chances are you may know the voice of my next guest. Patrick Lavery was the afternoon news anchor at New Jersey 101.5 Radio until last December when he was laid off. Patrick joins us now on New Jersey Politics. Patrick, it's good to see you here.
Good to see you, Laura.
Yeah, so for full disclosure, not only do I know you professionally, but we know each
Yes.
other also through the theater community. You do theater at Music Mountain Theater, where my daughter also does theater. And Patrick, when I follow you on social media as well, and when news came that you were being laid off, a lot of people really reacted. Not just because they know you, but because it's important to have local reporters. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of that?
Well, I always say that I was laid off in good company because the day that that decision came down, the other person who was let go from our building was Michael Simons, who is, in my estimation, one of the very best State House reporters that you could ever ask for, not only in New Jersey, but in any state in the country. So I had lunch with Mike about a week and a half after it happened, and we were just kind of rehashing this very topic, how there seems to be, I think that Twitter has been wonderful over the years for getting bites out in a short amount of time that are digestible for a large amount of people. What I think that that's done, though, is it's taken energy and it's taken focus away from in-depth political reporting that I think the public not only needs to know, but they used to digest in large quantities rather, and they're not doing that anymore.
Right. Well, I mean, it's one thing to get a quick headline, but like you said, on social media, you don't always know who the source is. And it's not that you have to have all these years of experience. It's more about the relationships that you develop and that reliability of, oh, I know such and such. Yeah, they're going to do a fair job. They're going to hold me accountable. And that's now missing.
That's right. I think of people who've reached out to me who are not really personal connections, but heard the news and said, I enjoyed your reporting, or I enjoyed speaking to you as a media personality. I enjoyed our interviews together. And these are people who you have your personal life and you have your professional life, but in your professional life, you also do have these connections that you make that they almost feel like an extension of your work family. If you work in media, you don't have the personal relationships with them, but you know you can go to them for a good quote and they know that they can trust you.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's all about those relationships. Now, is this, do you think this is purely financially driven? What do you think the reason is? Because you're in, sadly, very good company. Our other guest, was the only reporter covering New Jersey's congressional delegation. New Jersey Advanced Media lets him go. I mean, what do you think is driving all of this?
Well, the way that it was explained to me, and I won't get too deep in the weeds on it, but from the radio perspective, the radio broadcast side of the revenue picture is what it is. And it took a hit during COVID when, if you listen to 1015 during those last couple of weeks of March and into early April of 2020, all the car dealerships were closed and they pulled their sponsorships. And we had kind of a first round of layoffs at that time.
You might be able to get a story out in 30 seconds, but all of the legwork that goes into putting that together, because you vetted to make sure, what is the source? What is the perspective? How do I get this down succinctly? And that takes experience. It takes more than somebody just, grabbing a quick little recording on your cell phone and putting it out there and saying, well, that's news. And New Jersey is the most populated state. And here we are. Especially, when you look at Advanced Media and New Jersey 101.5, that's part of their slogan is not New York, not Philadelphia. It's New Jersey. Yeah. And where are all the reporters going? That's very frustrating.
Exactly right. And when you say most populated, I think we also need to consider most diverse, ethnically and racially diverse. And that was a question and a problem that we always struggled with at 1015. Knowing the key demographics that we attract and then trying to pull in the listeners or in later years here the readers online of other demographics that don't typically listen to 1015. We don't cover their issues. We don't, they had not paid attention to our coverage in the past. And how do you reach those brackets?
Do you have thoughts on how this industry is evolving? Because there is a definite distrust between, legitimate journalists and the tabloid journalists, so to speak.
I'm an alum of the College of New Jersey, and I still go back time and time again to give lectures on campus, via professors that I had and I have personal relationships with. And it's getting harder and harder. And I used to do career fairs as well for 1015. It's getting harder and harder as the years go by to sell this industry to young people who want to be reporters because of exactly what you said. Trust in the media used to be, it's kind of trite to think of the Walter Cronkites or the Peter Jennings of the world, but these were people that you trusted implicitly. And I feel that I talk a lot about connections, but I feel that those connections between audience and reporter are not being made anymore. You can't look somebody in the eye and know whether they've got the information that is properly vetted or something that is conjecture, is speculation. So the industry is not what I got into 20 years ago when I was in college. And I really think for the next generation that's going to be out there reporting, that's a real challenge as they go through J school or whatever however they get into the business. How do they navigate that? How do their professors, their mentors navigate them and prepare them to be in this business? Because you need the media. It's just a question of how do they establish trust? And that is more difficult, as you said, than ever before, because if you have $8, you can appear as trusted on Twitter as someone who has 30 years of experience.
Correct. And then when there is big news, what do people do? If they're, 9/11, people want to know, how does this affect me? Who do I go to? Who do I trust? Who's the person? I don't want to hear, a stranger. I want to hear local. What does this mean locally? Do you find that too, that people want to know? Or when they come up to you, hey, I saw this headline, what's going on? They like that local nuance.
You see a lot of it now with, unfortunately, the big TV stations in the New York and Philadelphia markets. They're having to cover a lot more of that ground that was covered by local outlets here in New Jersey that have been taken over by larger corporations. They all used to be independent newspapers or broadcast outlets, and maybe they had a parent company, but that parent company was still local. And now you have these mega corporations, whether it be Gannett or whether it be Town Square, which owns 1015, that are national brands, and they just don't have. It's not that they don't want to concentrate the resources on being as local as possible. It's just not under the umbrella. It's just not part of the business model.
Yeah, yeah. Well, can you talk a little bit about, since you've been laid off, what type of reaction, what type of support are you getting? Are people, saying, hey, we really miss you, we really want to hear? Are you seeing a difference? Are you hearing from people? What's going on?
I am hearing from people, and I'm hearing from both people that I worked with, which has been very gracious of them to extend their hands and their ears to kind of hear what I've been up to. But I've heard from people who are friends of mine who said, I know I knew you 10, 15 years ago, and we're kind of out of touch, but I always appreciated when I would turn on the radio and I would hear your voice. And that means a lot to me. That validates, even as we were talking about trust, right? And you're not even sure as a member of the media if your audience is trusting you. To hear things like that are hugely validating, and they confirm that what I did, the work that I did, and the work that we all do as journalists trying to stay as locally focused as possible in New Jersey.
Yeah,
It does matter, and there may not be as much room for it, unfortunately, in the eyes of many as there used to be. But there are people out there who hear that and again digest it, and it means something to them. And when that feedback comes back to me, it means a lot to me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I tell you, I was out of the State House for a number of years, and then coming back, when you make those connections again, they're like, oh, good, there's somebody here who we can trust and
Right.
we can tell. And people, those who are in elected office, they want to tell their story. They want to be challenged too. And it's our job as storytellers. I even have a hard time even calling myself a journalist sometimes because I think
Yeah.
of Walter Cronkite, Peter Jennings, really great. I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm not up to that level. But like, again, for a few bucks, you can go online and now you're a journalist. So it definitely makes
Right.
your job, the job as a news consumer, a little bit more challenging. But Patrick, thank you so much for coming on, and we would love to have you back on again.
Oh, thank you, Laura.
All right. And that will do it for today. I'm Laura Jones. Thank you so much for watching New Jersey Politics. We look forward to seeing you back here next time.